Welcome back to the program. So today's release of the JFK files was basically the equivalent of the Epstein release a couple of weeks ago of these folks parading around old documents that we've already known before. Was there anything in these new documents that was so shocking? Absolutely not. There really was not. So overall, I would say it was a dud. Now, many of you might have already seen some of the things that I'm going to briefly discuss, and one of the reason I say briefly is because it looks like to me that they are trying to somehow put together this narrative still, after all these years, 62 years of lying, they're still trying to get to this narrative that it was a lone gunman and it was only Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, we know that that is not true. Now, one of the things that they do kind of at least allude to is the fact that the CIA was indeed involved. But we've already known that. There's no smoking gun here, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the things that I guess are common knowledge, from today. We'll discuss that a little bit. But then I'm going to go through and I'm going to talk about the three events that were not part of these files. Now, I don't know the reason why they were not part of these files. Perhaps they're still being held. Perhaps not all of the files have actually been released. At least that would be my opinion. So, some of the things that they talked about right off the bat were Lee Harvey Oswald was reportedly considered a poor shot during target practice in the USSR. The JFK files revealed that Lee Harvey Oswald was a spy, tried twice to obtain a USSR visa from Mexico City. CIA memo from September 24th, 1963 confirms Lee Harvey Oswald was under surveillance by the CIA 59 days before JFK's assassination. Well, to me that sounds like they were working with him and they were going to make him the fall guy. Gary Underhill. Now, we're going to go into that in a second. Gary Underhill claimed the CIA was responsible for JFK's assassination and that he was later found dead in what was, quote, ruled a suicide, Epstein style. We'll go through that a little bit later. A man by the name of Sergei Sonorno allegedly had knowledge that Oswald would be killed after assassinating Kennedy and that Martin Luther King Jr. would also be assassinated. He also knew in advance that Kennedy would be killed in Dallas. Jack Ruby claimed that his decision to kill Oswald was influenced by his Jewish identity. No one believes that. Mere hours after Jack Ruby shot and killed Lee Harvey Oswald, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover urgently called for a swift public report to prevent conspiracy theories from gaining traction. Again, as I've said to you previously, the phrase conspiracy theory was born and created by the CIA. It was created by the CIA because they wanted to get out in front of the official narrative of the Warren Commission findings on the assassination of President JFK. Anyone that said that there was another shooter, anyone that had any deviation other than the Warren Commission, was labeled by the CIA at that time as a, quote, conspiracy theorist. It's important to know that. Okay, JFK, let's see. The CIA monitored Japan's Vietnam ties. Apparently it was a radical extremist group, leftist group in Japan that was against Kennedy, was against the war and things like that. They talked about that. Lee Harvey Oswald was allegedly under the direction of KGB officer Kasatov, reportedly linked to Department V. J. Edgar Hoover was asked whether Lee Harvey Oswald was an FBI informant and if there was a conspiracy to assassinate JFK. A letter addressed to then Senator Joe Biden accused him of being a traitor. That letter was apparently, allegedly, signed by JFK Jr. So that's kind of interesting that they called Joe Biden a traitor. We've already seen that that's accurate. He's been a traitor all these years. The CIA was intercepting U.S. Postal Service mail sent to the USSR and had 300 CIA members indexing 250,000 names. An FBI interview with Assistant Director Alan Belmont on May 6, 1964 includes questions about Ruby and Oswald's connections on page 27, but many pages are still missing, with the interview supposedly extending to page 473. A man claiming to be a Polish driver for a Russian vehicle, warning of Soviet plans to pay someone in the United States to assassinate the president, was possibly revealed here in these documents. Newly released JFK assassination records expose a failed 1955 CIA surveillance operation in Havana, Cuba. CIA memo reveals that agency officers claim they couldn't recall Watergate burglar James McCord's involvement in Cuban operations. JFK files reveal CIA's extensive global operations, listing 34 secret field bases across Africa, Europe, Asia, and Latin America. Let's see here. And so those were just some of the quote-unquote findings, okay? Now, one of the things that they were talking about was this John Garrett Underhill. And he has come up before, and I'm actually kind of surprised that they even had this information pertaining to him in here, but they did. Let me see if I can break this down here. Where is it? Yes, I'm still sick, which is unbelievable. It's been too long. Okay. Gary Underhill claimed that the CIA was responsible for JFK's assassination. He was then later found dead in what was ruled a, quote, suicide. So here's what this says here. Let me get here so I can read it. So Ramparts published this. Now, apparently Ramparts was the equivalent of like the Huffington Post or the Daily Kos, a far, far, far left-leaning publication, okay? The day after the assassination, Gary Underhill left Washington, D.C. in a hurry. Later that evening, he showed up at some home of some friends in the state of New Jersey. Those friends said that he was very agitated. A small clique within the CIA was also responsible for this assassination, he confided, and he said he was deathly afraid for his life and probably is going to leave the country immediately. Less than 6 months later, Underhill was found shot to death in his Washington, D.C. apartment, and of course the coroner said that it was ruled a suicide. So the question now remains is why and who was this particular character, John Garrett Underhill Jr.? Well, I'm going to give you some information on this guy. He was a U.S. Army captain in World War II. He received the Army Commendation Medal for meritorious services. He was a Harvard graduate. He was a linguist, self-taught military affairs expert, and for 5 years he was a military correspondent for Life magazine and helped to make their foreign news department one of the most knowledgeable centers of military intelligence in the world. He was born in Brooklyn. He's the son of John Garrett and Louisa Mann Wingate. Now what's interesting is his mother, Louisa Mann Wingate, was the daughter of General George Wood Wingate, who played a role in forming the National Rifle Association. His mother died in 1927 when Underhill was only 12 years old. Underhill went on to study and graduate from Harvard. In 1937 and 1940, it was announced that Underhill was to wed Miss Patricia Semple Dunkerson, a graduate of Vassar College. Underhill served as a technical editor and later chief editor of the War Department's Military Intelligence Division between July 6, 1943 and May of 1946. He was an expert in photography, enemy weapons, and related technical specialities. His role was recognized in a publication of the Memorial Church of All Angels in Twilight Park, Haynes Fall, New York. Report on the Red Army was a lengthy report written by John Garrett Underhill Jr. under the pseudonym Garrett Underhill. The report was published on October 16, 1949. In the report, it was noted how Garrett Underhill was a writer and an editor and served 3.5 years on the War Department's general staff. It noted how he is a owner of a large private collection of Soviet small arms acquired during a 15-year interest in foreign armaments. From late 1949 to the mid-1950s, Underhill was a contact with the Office of the Domestic Contact Service of the CIA. In 1951, he wrote a 6,500-word essay with Ronald Schiller entitled The Tragedy of the U.S. Army for Look magazine that was published on February 13, 1951. After writing the article, the Harvard Alumni Bulletin printed Underhill's own words of how he got recalled to brown suit service after finishing the article. Following World War II, Underhill volunteered and served as deputy director for the Civil Defense in Washington, D.C., an exercise meant to simulate an evacuation in the event of a hydrogen bomb attack called Operation Alert, which was carried out in 1955. Underhill was outspoken in his criticism of the exercise, stating in the press that it was, quote, not a drill but a show. During the exercise, he declined heading to the command post for the exercise, claiming, quote, it was so inadequate it couldn't cope with a brush fire threatening a doghouse and a backyard. Samuel Spencer, one of the commissioners who governed the District of Columbia, upon hearing Underhill's criticism, ordered his dismissal just as Operation Alert began. Underhill took an active interest in family organizations. One letter from November 1950 expressed his interest in the revival of the three Underhill organizations. He would have ample opportunity to play a hand in that revival between 1954 and 1956, when he served as president of the Underhill Society of America. Underhill served as a CIA informant and military affairs editor at Life magazine for 5 years, associated with the death of JFK. Now, here they talk about his death. Jim Garrison, the famous district attorney from Louisiana, conducted the investigation into the assassination of Kennedy. In an interview that Garrison gave to Playboy magazine, he referred to a, quote, CIA agent, without giving and divulging the name, with valuable information pertaining to his investigation. The name of Gary Underhill was eventually unearthed and interchangeably in sources with John Garrett Underhill. A memorandum from the CIA to the Justice Department in 1967 referred to that interview and John Garrett Underhill Jr. in some detail. So it says right here, CIA agent Gary Underhill, again, the name used interchangeably, was said to have a connection with Harold Isaac, who in turn knew Oswald's cousin, Marilyn Moret. Prior to Garrison being able to meet and interview Underhill, he was found dead in his bed with a bullet wound behind his left ear on May 6, 1964. Sources, of course, differ on whether the cause of his death was suicide or not, or if people or groups had motivations to see him removed because he had secret information that he threatened to divulge. His death certificate from the District of Columbia Department of Public Health listed the cause of death as, quote, shot self in head with automatic pistol. After his death, he was buried in the Underhill burying ground in Lattington Town, New York. His wife died in 1973, blah, 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 blah. So, this is the guy that, according to these documents that have been released, said that he knew who killed JFK. And he said because he knew this information that he feared for his life. He went and he talked to his friends in New Jersey about it. He was very agitated. He was very scared. And he said he was going to be leaving the country. Then he finds himself dead less than 6 months later with a bullet wound to the back of his head through his left ear. I don't know about you, but that does not sound like a suicide at all. Okay? So that's one thing that we need to discuss. The second thing is this, and this is from the great Roger Stone, who, by the way, I would trust more than just about any of this stuff out there. He talks about this interesting connection that is not, at least at this point, part of these JFK files. There is an interesting figure by the name of Ruth Paine. And what are Ruth Paine's CIA connections and photographs that raise questions about the JFK assassination? So I'm going to go through what this was that Roger sent me. During his brief time in police custody on November 22nd, 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald made a striking statement to reporters. Now, this is in the record, okay? You can go back to the archives of him going through, wherever it was. I think it was in an airport or something like that, and then Jack just shoots him right out of nowhere. Okay, he's talking to reporters, and he calls himself a patsy, okay? Keep that in mind. I'm just a patsy. Captured on film as Oswald was escorted through the Dallas Police Department, not the airport, Dallas Police Department. His words have fueled decades of speculation and conspiracy theories. Many believe this was Oswald's way of claiming that he was framed or manipulated into taking the fall for a larger, more sinister conspiracy behind President John F. Kennedy's assassination. If Oswald was indeed a patsy, who might know how he was set up? Enter Ruth Hyde Paine, a seemingly ordinary Quaker woman with extraordinary ties to key figures in Oswald's life. She has long been a focus of such questions. With what we know about the weaponization of our intelligence agencies and with President Trump's January 23rd, 2025 executive order to declassify JFK assassination-related documents, Ruth Paine's story is poised for renewed scrutiny. As the last person Oswald reportedly called from prison, records show he called her twice. Paine's involvement in his life before and after the assassination has raised many red flags for decades. Still alive, by the way. Now 93 years old, Ruth Paine continues to defend her role in the events leading up to JFK's assassination. Labeled a, quote, friendly Quaker woman by the first FBI agent involved in the case, Paine has maintained her innocence and insisted that she was a well-meaning friend drawn into history's darkest chapters. But her connections to intelligence agencies and her actions at critical moments have fueled suspicions of a more calculated role. Her association with Lee Harvey Oswald began in February of 1963 when she met him and his wife Marina at a party hosted by CIA asset George de Mohrenschildt. Shortly afterwards, Paine invited Marina to live in her home, portraying herself as a benevolent friend helping a struggling couple. However, some argue that there was more than altruism to this. Critics, including New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison, have long questioned Paine's story. Garrison famously noted that her joint income tax returns were classified, asking what was so special about this particular family that made the federal government so protective of their tax returns. Many hope these tax records will be among the newly declassified documents. From what I can gather so far, they are not. Paine's family connection deepens this intrigue. Her father worked for the CIA for international and also for international development aid. Widely considered a CIA front, and her sister Sylvia Hyde Hoke was directly employed by the Central Intelligence Agency. Meanwhile, her estranged husband Michael Paine a Bell helicopter engineer, was also tied to intelligence operations. Michael was acquainted with de Mohrenschildt, the CIA field agent who introduced the Paynes to the Oswalds. Ruth Payne played a pivotal role in Harvey's life in the 9 short months that they knew each other. It was she who moved the couple from New Orleans to Dallas, and it was she who helped Oswald secure his job at the Texas School Book Depository where the shots were allegedly fired. It was her garage that housed Oswald's rifle and the typewriter used to draft his infamous letter to the Soviet embassy. Payne even handed a copy of this letter to the FBI the day after the assassination. Her extensive testimony to the Warren Commission, where she answered more questions than any other witness, became foundational to its conclusion that Oswald had acted alone. However, many believe her proximity to critical moments and her ties to the intelligence agencies themselves suggest that she may have been way more instrumental in crafting this lone gunman narrative to bury evidence of a much broader conspiracy. Author Walter Herbst highlighted an unsettling detail. When authorities arrived at Payne's home the day after the assassination, she reportedly greeted them with, "We've been expecting you." Her readiness to hand over key evidence has only fueled suspicion of prior knowledge. One of the most haunting artifacts of Payne's involvement is a photograph published in Life magazine on November 23, 1963, the day after JFK's assassination. The image shows Ruth Payne seated calmly at a table beside her estranged husband, Michael Payne. His striking resemblance to Lee Harvey Oswald has sparked years of speculation, with some suggesting that he could have been a doppelganger for Oswald. And they do look very, very similar. Critics argue this resemblance could have been exploited to craft the narrative surrounding Oswald's guilt. Ruth's claim and demeanor in the photograph, taken mere hours after the president's murder and a police search of her home, stands in stark contrast to the chaos of the moment. I'll add this image, by the way, into the thumbnail. The CIA's covert activities during the Cold War, combined with Ruth Payne's deep connections to intelligence figures, have led many to believe that she was part of a deliberate effort to manipulate the public and bury evidence of immense coordination to set Harvey up, which is why in the Dallas Police Department he told the news and the reporters that he was, quote, a patsy. Critics argue that her ties to the CIA hint at a broader weaponization of the intelligence agencies. Gee, where have we ever heard about intelligence agencies being weaponized ever before? A reality that has become increasingly exposed, obviously, in recent years. Adding to this mystery, a 2022 documentary, The Assassination and Mrs. Payne, revealed surprising details about her life. Despite their divorce, Ruth and Michael Payne remained close, living in the same retirement community. Their ongoing relationship has raised questions about the true nature of their separation and whether it was part of some type of a calculated facade. As new documents come to light with President Trump's declassification, the public may finally uncover the truth about Ruth Payne's role in the JFK assassination. Was she a well-meaning bystander caught in the crossfire of history? Or was she a key player in a much more broader and more sinister plot? For now, Ruth Payne remains one of the most enigmatic figures in the entire mystery of JFK's assassination. A puzzle piece that could hold the key to understanding who killed the 35th president and why. That was from the great Roger Stone. Now, the last thing that's not in here is anything that I can see about who Roger Stone and me and many others believe was behind this assassination. And that was Lyndon Baines Johnson. There is no doubt in my mind, nor is there any doubt in many other people's mind, that Lee Harvey Oswald was not only a patsy, but more importantly, LBJ set this thing up. And I don't know why these documents are not showing this right now. Perhaps maybe we need a deeper dive and maybe they'll be in there. Or what I suspect, these are not all of the documents. You may remember just a few hours earlier before the release, there was between, quote, 500 and 700 documents that just went through a more in-depth lawyer review from the Department of Justice. Are those documents released or not? That would be my question. And what about Malcolm Mac Wallace? And what about Clifton Collins, who was the executive director of the DNC at the time and an extremely close advisor to LBJ? Roger Stone says in his own book that Clifton Collins was ordered by LBJ to hire Malcolm Mac Wallace, who was a hitman, to kill JFK. So, all I can say is, at least at this point, I don't see any major smoking guns, number one. Number two, I am not convinced that these are all the documents. And number three, where are Malcolm Mac Wallace? Where are any documents either proving or disproving, because I'll go that route too, LBJ's involvement or non-involvement? And what about Ruth Paine, who, by the way, is still alive today at 93 years old? Why isn't somebody tracking her down, putting her under oath, doing a deposition with her to find out what she knows? Or is she going to mysteriously pass away soon too? I don't know, man. 62 years, and I don't know about you folks, but 62 years, I still don't feel as though we are getting the full story. Perhaps, maybe, there are other documents out there, or perhaps there's other information that they're not telling us. Those are my thoughts. What are yours? Put them down in the comments below. We'll see you in the next one.